Welcome to my shop. Today I'm rebuilding a carburetor on an Allis Chalmers WD, and you're welcome to follow along. The tractor behind me runs really rich, which is an indication to me that either the main jet is plugged or I have a float that is sinking down. It's got gas inside the float. Other symptoms of a tractor that needs a carburetor rebuild would be if it runs only when the choke is halfway out or all the way out, if it leaks gas out the sides. Any of those symptoms would be a reason to rebuild the carburetor on your tractor. Today I'm working on a Zenith carburetor, and Allis Chalmers tractors did come with both a Zenith and a Marvel shoveler carburetor, so you'll only be able to follow along if you also have a Zenith carburetor. This is a WD tractor. The same carburetor would be on a WC tractor, and the techniques will apply if you have a Zenith carb on an Allis Chalmers B, C, or CA tractor. To begin, you need to take your carburetor off of the tractor. There are a few different linkages in the back, one for your choke and one for your throttle. There's two either nuts or bolts up here, depending on what carburetor you're working on. You can turn your fuel off at the sediment bowl and then remove the line here. Just be careful when you pull that out that you're actually moving the nut and not damaging the fuel line itself. This air intake is often really stiff, so just loosen it up here at the clamp, and then you'll be able to kind of push it off and leave that hose right onto the air breather there, and then you can take your carburetor completely off. The next step is to disassemble your carburetor. There are 4 screws around here that hold the top half and the bottom half of your carburetor together, which you can take out. Make sure that you take your old gasket off, and if there's any remains of the gasket on your intake manifold, be sure to take that off as well. You can remove both your idle jet and your main jet. Inside, you'll see the needle seat, the venturi, and the float. You can take all of that out as well. Okay, I have my 2 halves apart here. There's more disassembly that we're going to do, but I'll talk you through that. The next disassembly steps are a little more challenging, so follow closely. There are 2 screws on the butterfly here. This is for your throttle up at the top. You'll take both of these screws out, then the plate will come out, which you will reuse, and then your shaft pulls out the side like so. You'll get a new shaft in your kit. Underneath here, there is a small jet in there. You're probably going to have to use a super small screwdriver to get in there, and it might be tight. You can loosen that up and remove that jet. You'll get a brand new jet in your complete kit. So you can take that out for cleaning and then replace in a bit. There's a jet just like that in the bottom. You'll remove that the same way. Right here you have an emulsion tube which you can take out with a deep well socket like I have here. That will come out. They're kind of long on the threads like that. Definitely want to clean that up before we put it back in. Down here at the choke is a little bit of a challenge. This shaft does have a small pin through it. I had to use a really small punch to drive the pin through. I put the bottom of my carburetor in the vise to hold it tight. I used the punch to drive that pin through, and then I had to even use a smaller pick like this to push it through. So now my pin is removed, and I saved the pin because a new one isn't included in the kit. Inside here we have the butterfly just like we saw before, so I'll take both of those screws out for the next part of the disassembly. When you have your choke door out, you can do some inspection on this spring, make sure that it's working properly. If it's not, that would be a reason why your tractor might be starting hard. With the door out, now you're ready to take the shaft out. Remember, I did remove that pin through here, so now the end will come off. This end is being reused, and we also wanted to protect the housing of the carburetor. So put this in a vise, and you do have to use quite a bit of force with a punch and a hammer, but be careful so that you don't damage the housing of your carburetor. With that off, then your shaft will come out. You'll get a new piece like this inside your kit, but you'll reuse this piece and the pin that goes inside. The last thing to take off is this fuel elbow down here. Notice how I have the wrench on the elbow part, not on the threads, in order to loosen that, so I'm not going to damage the threads. Sometimes there will be a screen underneath here. Let's see if this one doesn't, but I still want to take that out so I can clean the passageway. Use a can of carburetor cleaner to spray through all of your passageways. Then after you've sprayed, follow with a blow-off nozzle on your air compressor to dry them out, and then clean them a second time and dry them a second time. You really got to make sure that your carburetor is completely clean before you start putting your new parts in. Okay, I have my carburetor clean. Notice that I cleaned the surface where the gasket was. All my passageways have been thoroughly cleaned, so now I'm ready to reassemble the carburetor. You have 4 different carb kit options. I want to explain the differences between them for you. The most important thing to know is that the float is always sold separately. So if you need a brand new float, that will be a separate purchase from your kit. This is the first kit option. It's gaskets only. So if your carburetor only needs to be cleaned, you could purchase this kit. The next jump up includes your needle and seat here, as well as your idle jet. Then very next jump up includes the throttle shaft, as well as the parts that you saw in the previous kit. And then the very best kit that you could buy would be right here. This has both your choke and your throttle shafts, needle seat, the jets for your passageways here. This is the best kit that you can buy that we offer, and I'll show you how to put every single piece into the carburetor right now. Be sure to read this number on your carburetor to make sure that you order the right parts. Your carburetor does have 3 bushings. There's 1 on each side of this shaft, and then 1 at the top here at your throttle. On this side is the plug. You'll need to take those out and replace them. You can just pry them out with a screwdriver. You can damage them, that's okay. Your felt will probably need to be cut down to be a little bit smaller, and then you can put your felt into the hole there, like that. And then you have both the rubber and the end bushing there. You line those up, set them in here around that felt, and then just use a socket that's appropriately sized to go on top of that and drive it in. You can take out the second part of your main jet that just screws out. Take that out so that you can clean that passageway thoroughly. I have a clean emulsion tube ready to go back in with the new gasket on it. That will just tighten down with the socket, same way we took it out. Got new jets. This shorter one goes right here, and then this bigger one goes on the bottom for your main jet, and then in the top I have the smallest one already screwed in. Up here you can put your seat in. That has the gasket underneath it as well, and then you can also reinsert your elbow to put all those pieces into the carburetor. I have my choke shaft in. The choke shaft is really, really difficult. So if you are a very experienced mechanic and you want to replace your choke shaft, then go for it. If you're more of a beginner mechanic, then you might want to forego replacing your choke shaft and use the one that you have, as long as it's not too sloppy to be used. If you want to replace it, it is spring loaded, so you'll have to move it back and forth when you're putting your butterfly in. Also make sure that you reuse that pin and drive it all the way through so that your shaft is secure. If for some reason your pin is bigger than your shaft, you might need to re-drill that hole to make it a little bit bigger to fit your existing shaft, just depending on what model carburetor you have. You might need to make that adjustment. So that's the choke shaft. Let's move on up here and talk about the needle and seat. It is really important that you put your gasket on before you put your float on. Don't make that mistake of setting your float and everything and forgetting about the gasket. When you have your float like this, you can see how my needle is dangling from the float. It's placed on there. Then you drop it into the seat, which I have tightened up. And then there's a pin that slides across the bottom of the float. Let me find my pin here and show you. Right here. This just goes right across. This pin comes with your carburetor kit, and the float is sold only as the float. So if you just find the float, make sure you get a pin as well. So that is assembled there. Next, I'll show you how to set the float properly. It's important that both of the pontoons on your float are even, meaning that one is not higher than the other. You can use a ruler to measure from the bottom of the surface here to the top of the bottom of the pontoon to make sure that they're both at that same distance. Mine are at 3/8 of an inch if you want to make yours match. Once you have that set, then you can put the two halves of your carburetor together. You can just put your half together like that. You want to make sure that it's a snug fit. You might have to wiggle it a little bit, and then you can put your 4 screws in all the way around. I'm ready to put my new throttle shaft in. I do have the screw installed here for the idle. The new bushing will make this really snug, which is good, so we don't have any air blowing through there while the tractor is running. I'm going to push that all the way through like so. Then I have my butterfly. This is directional. The writing on the top goes up towards me, and then the arrow will face me. I'm going to drop this in there, see that my holes are lined up like that, and then I'll just start one of these screws. Self-starting screwdriver is a lifesaver on these butterflies because those screws can be so difficult. I'm going to tighten that up and I'll put the other one in. Let's talk about the idle and the main jets here. I have my idle jet in just so that it's snug, and then I'm going to turn it out one complete turn like so. You don't want to screw it all the way in so that you damage the seat, just until it's snug, and then back out one turn. Down here, you're gonna push it in all the way, screw this in all the way, and then back out 2 turns. When I put my main jet back in, I did put the new gasket behind there, and you'll want to do the same. My carburetor is back on the tractor, so now we're ready to start it up and see how that improves. I'm happy with the way that my tractor runs. You saw that it ran good at both idle and at full throttle. If I needed to make adjustments to my carburetor, there would be 3 different adjustments that I could make. The first would be on the throttle, or the screw that is on the back of the throttle shaft. You can reach in there and make a small adjustment if, when your tractor is at idle, it's running too fast or too slow. You can make slight adjustments to that screw. Another adjustment that you can make would be if there's flutter in your idle, then you'd need to move your idle screw that is in the face of the carburetor, either in or out, just a 1/4 of a turn. But for that screw, normally that 1 turn out is really sufficient. The last adjustment you might want to make would be to your main jet that's at the very bottom of the carburetor. If your tractor is running at full speed and it acts like it needs more fuel, then you could turn it out a 1/4 of a turn. If it's running too rich and it's smoking, then you could turn it in a 1/4 of a turn. When you're making these adjustments, make sure that you just do a little adjustment at a time. You don't need to do major turns because a little adjustment will make a big difference. I hope that this video is helpful to you when you want to make this repair to your own tractor. When you're ready to buy parts, you can purchase them at farmtractorrepair.com. Your purchase on that site helps to fund future tractor tutorials. While you're on the site, look around. There's lots of Allis Chalmers licensed products also available there.